Now, the Finance Minister has a tough balancing act ahead of him tomorrow. He'll have to decide how much is spent on solving the electricity crisis and where to trim when it comes to government expenditure. Let's unpack these issues further. We are joined by Zukiswa Kota. She is the head of the South African program at the Public Service Accountability Monitor. Thank you very much, Zukiswa, for your time here on eNCA. Now, let's talk firstly about this huge elephant in the room, right? South Africans want to hear about the electricity crisis coming to an end, but of course we do have other expenses as well. How do you think do you think he'll be able to actually balance this out?
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. And that's a difficult question, one that many civic actors and coalitions like, ourselves and members of the Budget Justice Coalition, for example, have said that the trade-offs are clear. They've always been difficult, but the bottom line for us has always been what must come first are socioeconomic rights, and so that any trims or cuts or tough decisions that are not made at the expense, for example, of social spend, at the expense of education, at the expense of public health. So as at the outset, for us, those have always been the concerns from a governance and accountability perspective, and from a human rights perspective. Yesterday was Social Rights, Social Justice Day, for instance. That really should be front of mind for ourselves and for the Minister of Finance tomorrow.
So what do you expect to hear, or what are you hoping to hear from him tomorrow? Because obviously every department is asking for money, and then there's this, monkey on our backs as well.
Yeah. I think it's important to take a step back to recognize, one, the importance of these promises that are made. So in October last year, we listened to the Minister of Finance outline the medium-term budget policy statement. And in that, the Minister, on the one hand, really admitted to the billions of rands that have been spent in, for example, bailouts to Eskom. And of course other state-owned entities, outlined the losses to corruption, outlined the losses as a result of poor procurement, for instance, and then promised that in the budget that would be tabled tomorrow, we would hear further details, one, about what these turnaround plans would look like, what they would be, and secondly, in particular, around Eskom, what the program in detail would look like. And so there are commitments that have been made in that regard that we're looking to for tomorrow. There were also promises made between that budget, so the medium-term budget, and the State of the Nation address, which was recently tabled, around the procurement bill, which has really important implications across all departments. So we ask these questions about where should the cuts be, what are the trade-offs, all departments require more money potentially. But if we're not really getting the procurement and contracting right, and those leakages out of the state, we're going to be singing the same song over and over for years to come. And so we really have called for the expediting of the procurement bill. And so all those promises that are made there, for instance, around tightening up and avoiding further capture in entities like Eskom, the procurement bill should be making those and implement that should be, those should be priorities that are made. And of course, priorities that are resourced within the budget. So not just the promises, but actually that there is money that is put alongside those promises. There is a list, but I think to come back to the socioeconomic aspects, we would really want to see that the president promises around, for instance, what is becoming universal basic income, the social relief of distress grant, and similar social welfare packages, for instance, that we step beyond the promises, and that the Minister of Finance, in tabling his budget, lives up to those commitments that have been made in the SONA. There were some encouraging noises, encouraging sounds, commitments that the SONA 2023 made, and that many have spoken about. So I think really that the key now is to look out for that those commitments are resourced. And this is why for us it's particularly important to track the policy commitments against the budget allocations.
Yeah, it's going to be quite a difficult task. Like you said, he had the medium policy budget statement last year, promises that were made about tomorrow. But of course, then we had this crisis, and the president has demands that he must try and see where the finances should go to try and fulfill the president's demands. But I was going to ask you about the social relief of distress grant, and at least that they have been able to extend quite a couple of times. But are you concerned at all about the declaration of the national state of disaster that has been explained as something that says that red tape around procurement when it comes to Eskom will then be taken away? Are you concerned at all that this will probably open room for wrongdoing, maladministration, etc.?
Yeah, that's also a really important question. And so for us, on the one hand, it was, an indictment, the need to declare this, state of disaster on the one hand. It's been long, in the making in many respects, but it is a necessary step. Many have indicated just how urgent the circumstances are right now. And so that recognition, for us is welcome on the one hand. On the other, the point you raise about the potential for opening up really serious sort of looting space in the context of the procurement agreements, in the space of like really urgent purchasing agreements and so on. What is very encouraging for us, and we've already seen the performance of the Auditor General's office to date, what's encouraging is the very clear pronouncement that the President made around the monitoring that will be undertaken by the AG's office. We did see how important it was in the context of the COVID-19 procurement, for instance, the real-time monitoring. And so for us, that was important. Perhaps to take it a step further, what we would really want to see are those clear plans around what will the monitoring actually look like, what will the reporting timeframes look like, and what the safeguards will really kind of, how those will be implemented. Yeah. And lastly, I've seen that there have been really important collaborations, or the outcomes of the collaborations between civic actors and the AG's office, for example, in the context of procurement monitoring. And so we would also seek to understand the extent to which those outside the state will be leaned upon to really have to leverage that procurement authority, or leverage that procurement monitoring capacity, because we've seen the gaps, we've seen how devastating the impact of procurement can really be.